The door wasn't supposed to be unlocked. Carmen had cleaned the 40th floor of Hale Tower for 2 years without ever entering Suite 4001. Her cart never stopped there. Her key card never worked on that lock. When she'd asked about it her first week, the building manager, a soft-spoken man named Dale, had smiled like she'd asked something slightly embarrassing and told her the suite was under private use. Not her concern. Move along. So when her cart bumped the door on a Tuesday morning in October and the latch gave way, swinging inward with a slow, whispering creak, Carmen froze. The smell reached her before the darkness did. Not rot, not filth. Something more specific than that, something she recognized from her mother's last years in a small room in Phoenix. The smell of a life being lived in one space for too long. Stale air and medicinal soap, and the faint sweetness of fruit going soft. She stood in the doorway for 10 seconds. Then she heard the breathing. It came from behind a closed door on the far side of the living room. Slow, labored, unmistakable. Someone was in there. Someone who had not been mentioned in any briefing, any schedule, any conversation in 2 years of working this building. Carmen's hand found the edge of her cart. Her instinct said, back away, close the door, pretend the latch had never given. She had too much to lose. A daughter at home. A work authorization that was still provisional. A paycheck she could not afford to replace. She stepped inside. The living room looked like a photograph from a magazine that had been left out in the rain. Expensive furniture, still beautiful in its bones. A glass coffee table with a smear of something across one side. Curtains drawn so completely that the room existed in permanent dusk. A half-eaten bowl of crackers on the couch, and beside it, a single paperback book, dog-eared to the last few pages, like someone had been reading it very slowly, making it last. Carmen moved toward the closed door. She knocked, barely louder than a breath. The breathing stopped. Then a voice, hoarse and thin, said, "Not today. I told him, not today." Carmen's mouth went dry. She knocked again, softer. "I'm not him. I'm from housekeeping." Silence. Then, "Housekeeping doesn't come here." "The door was open. I didn't mean to. I can leave. I'm sorry." A long pause. The kind of pause that contains a decision being made. "How long have you worked here?" Carmen blinked. 2 years? And you've never been in this room?" "No, never." Another pause. Then the slow creak of something shifting, weight redistributed, feet finding the floor, movement. The door opened 3 inches and stopped. The woman on the other side of it looked at Carmen with eyes that were startling in their intensity. Brown, clear, exhausted. She was thin in the way that isn't chosen. Her hair had been cut with scissors, not a stylist, the line of it uneven at the jaw. She wore a clean sweater and clean pants, but the cleanliness felt deliberate, maintained with effort, like armor. She was not old, late 40s, maybe 50, but something about her moved like age. She looked at Carmen for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "Has he told anyone I'm dead yet?" Carmen didn't answer. She couldn't. The woman's mouth pressed together. "I'll take that as a yes." Her name was Diane Hale. And the man who had built this tower, whose name was on the lobby floor in 2-foot chrome letters, whose face appeared on the sides of buses across the city in sharp professional photographs, who had been named last year to a prominent philanthropic board and photographed shaking hands with the governor, was her husband. Was. Or still was. She wasn't certain which word applied anymore. She told Carmen in short, careful sentences, the way people speak when they've rehearsed something so many times they've stopped believing anyone will hear it. 3 years ago, Marcus had told her she needed to rest, that she'd been struggling, that the stress of their life was affecting her judgment. He'd brought her here, to the private suite at the top of his building, framed as a retreat, a reset, a kindness. The retreat had not ended. 3 weeks in, her phone disappeared. She'd assumed he'd taken it to charge it. It never came back. The building's Wi-Fi didn't reach the suite, and the landline in the room had been disconnected so recently she could still see the hole in the wall where it had been. The door to the hallway required a key card that she didn't have. A housekeeper came twice a week, not the building's regular staff but a private woman, silent and efficient and who never met her eyes. The private housekeeper had stopped coming 6 weeks ago. "Why?" Carmen asked. Diane looked at her steadily. "I think he's getting close to something." Carmen did not ask close to what. She already understood. If you've ever stood in a doorway and felt the weight of a choice that could change everything, tap like and stay with me, because what Diane told Carmen next is something I still can't fully believe. Diane had not been passive. That needed to be said clearly because it mattered. She'd spent 3 years looking for a way out, cataloging every detail she could about the room and the building and the routines of the people who moved through it. She'd kept a record, written in pencil in the margins of her paperback books, because pencils could be replaced and books could be hidden. She knew Marcus arrived at the tower every Tuesday and Thursday morning between 8 and 9. She knew the service elevator required a code that changed monthly. She knew the building manager, Dale, was loyal to Marcus in a particular way, the loyalty of someone who has been bought and is afraid of what happens when the price is called in. She also knew something else. Something she had been holding for months, like a coal she couldn't put down. "There are documents," she said. She touched the small shelf beside her bed. "In the books. Everything. Every date he came, what he said, what he threatened, every change in the room. I've been building a record since the 2nd month." Carmen looked at the shelf. 14 paperback books, spines cracked, margins dense with tiny handwriting. "Why didn't you give them to the private housekeeper?" Diane's expression didn't change. "Because she worked for him." She looked at Carmen with those exhausted, relentlessly clear eyes. "Do you?" Carmen stood there in the dim suite with the smell of stale air and soft fruit around her and thought about her daughter's school picture on her phone lock screen, thought about her work authorization, thought about what Dale might say if he saw her cart outside this door, thought about what Marcus Hale's face looked like on the side of a bus. That smooth, confident smile, the kind of smile that had never doubted it would be believed. "No," Carmen said, "I don't." She took 3 books off the shelf, tucked them under the towels on her cart, told Diane she would come back Thursday and not to tell anyone about this conversation. Not the private housekeeper if she returned. Not anyone. She pushed her cart back down the hallway and did not look at the security camera above the elevator until she was inside with the doors closed, and then she looked directly at it, because she'd learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do on a camera was act like you were hiding something. She smiled at her reflection in the elevator doors. Her hands were not shaking yet. They waited until she was in the break room, alone, before they started. The documents in the margins were meticulous. Carmen read them that night at her kitchen table after her daughter was asleep, a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow, the 3 paperbacks spread open under the lamp. Diane had written dates and times in a column down each margin, then observations in compressed shorthand that became easier to decode as Carmen got used to the logic. October 14th. M arrived 8:30, said I needed more rest. Asked if I'd been thinking about things more clearly. I said yes. He seemed disappointed. November 2nd. M arrived, new doctor, young, didn't meet my eyes. Said I was doing well but needed to remain calm. Did not examine me. Did not ask me a single question. Left with M. I don't think he's a doctor. January 19th. M said the service on my accounts had been paused due to a legal complication. He was very calm. He always is. I know now that calm is the weapon. March 4th. M mentioned Diana in passing. Diana, a woman's name. Said she'd been asking about the tower renovation. Caught himself. Changed subject. First time I've seen him make a mistake. Carmen turned the page. April 11th. M told me there had been an accident, a boating accident, that I had been reported missing, that for legal reasons it was better for me to remain undisclosed for now. He said it with that voice he uses for things that are already decided. Carmen set the book down. She picked up her phone and searched, Diane Hale missing. Then, Marcus Hale wife. Then, Hale Tower boating accident. The results came back fast. Socialite and philanthropist Diane Hale, wife of real estate developer Marcus Hale, was declared legally dead last spring following a boating accident off the coast of Maine in which her body was never recovered. Marcus Hale, visibly affected at a press conference following the ruling, thanked the search and rescue team for their efforts and asked for privacy as he processed his grief. There was a photograph. Marcus at a podium, eyes appropriately cast down. The grief was impeccable. It had the texture of something that had been practiced until it looked effortless. Carmen stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she started making a list. She was not impulsive. She needed to be clear about that because what came next required the opposite of impulse. It required thinking 3 steps ahead of a man who had spent 3 years thinking 5 steps ahead of everyone around him. She wrote down what she knew, what she had, what she needed, what the risks were. She had 3 books of handwritten records. She had a woman alive on the 40th floor of a building she cleaned 5 days a week. She had no leverage, no legal standing, no connections in the city that Marcus Hale hadn't touched. What she had was access. And access, she'd learned in 38 years of moving through spaces that didn't belong to her, was its own kind of power. Thursday morning, she arrived at the tower at her usual time, clocked in, took her cart up the service elevator. Dale was in the lobby. He looked at her with the mild attention he gave all the housekeeping staff, which was to say, barely any at all. She smiled. He looked away. She pushed the cart into the elevator. On the 38th floor, she stopped, took out her phone, took photographs of each page of the 3 books, slow and methodical, one at a time, until every margin was captured. Then she went to the 40th floor. The door to 4001 was locked this time. She knocked twice. Pause. Then once. The sound of movement. Then Diane's voice close to the door. "You came back." "I said I would." A pause that felt like relief being carefully folded. "He came yesterday, Wednesday. He never comes on Wednesday." Carmen felt the back of her neck go cold. "What did he say?" "He said things were moving ahead. He said there were new plans. He said he wanted me to know he'd always cared for me." There was a particular quality to the silence that followed that statement, the quality of a countdown. "He's going to do something soon," Diane said. "I know." Carmen pressed her palm flat against the door. "I photographed the books. I have everything on my phone. I need you to tell me one thing. Is there anyone outside, anyone at all, who knew you were alive? Anyone he couldn't have reached?" A long silence. "My sister, Ellen. I don't know if he's spoken to her. She lives in Portland. We were not close, Marcus made sure of that, but I don't think she ever fully believed the accident." "Last name?" "Rowan. Ellen Rowan." Carmen repeated it to herself twice. "I'm going to get you out. I don't know exactly how yet, but I need 2 more days." "Carmen!" Diane's voice pressed against the door, very quiet. "Be careful how you move in this building. Dale watches the cameras. Marcus reviews the footage every Friday." Carmen looked at the security camera at the end of the hallway, looked at it head-on, unhurried. "I know," she said. "That's why I always look like I belong." She pushed her cart down the hall. At the elevator, she pressed the button and waited with her hands resting at her sides and her face neutral, and thought about what it meant to be invisible in a place like this. How it was both the trap and the key. How Marcus Hale had built an entire empire by being looked at, admired, photographed, believed. How Carmen had spent her entire adult life being looked through. He'd never considered what the people he looked through might be seeing. She found Ellen Rowan's number that evening through 3 phone calls, a church directory, and a woman named Patricia who had worked with Diane 10 years ago and who went very quiet and very careful when Carmen said the name. Patricia didn't ask too many questions. She gave the number. She said in a voice that was almost too controlled, "I need you to know I always thought something was wrong." Carmen called Ellen Rowan that night. Ellen picked up on the second ring. Carmen said, "I work at Hale Tower. I've spoken to your sister." The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. Then Ellen Rowan said something in a voice stripped down to its bare wiring. "She's alive." It wasn't a question.
Yes. Another silence. Then, very quietly, "I'm going to need you to say that again."
If you've ever held a secret so heavy you felt it changing the shape of your spine, tap like, because what Ellen Rowan did next was not what Carmen expected. Ellen had spent 3 years not grieving. That was how she described it later, to the investigators, to the journalists, to anyone who asked. She'd stood at a memorial service for her sister and held her program and looked at the photograph on the easel and felt nothing except a low, persistent wrongness, like a note played slightly flat that no one else seemed to hear. She had saved every email from the 6 months before Diane disappeared. She had kept the voicemails. She had spoken twice to a private investigator who'd eventually told her there was nothing actionable and she needed to let herself heal. She had not let herself heal. She had not thrown away a single piece of paper. She asked Carmen 2 questions. Was Diane safe tonight? Carmen said she believed so, for now. Could she trust Carmen? Carmen said she couldn't prove that. She said, "Here is what I've done, and here is what I have, and here is what I risk if I'm wrong about you. Take it or don't." Ellen said, "What do you need?" Carmen told her. She needed someone to receive the photographs, someone outside the city, outside Marcus's network, outside the circle of people he'd had 3 years to prepare. She needed that person to have a lawyer, ideally someone who specialized in domestic or financial crimes and who didn't owe Marcus Hale anything. She needed it done before Friday. Ellen said, "I know someone. She handled my mother's estate. She's not connected to any of Marcus's people. I'm certain. Call her tonight." "I will." "And Ellen," Carmen kept her voice even, "don't come to the building. Don't contact Marcus. Don't do anything that changes his sense of how things are going." "I understand. He's good at reading change. He's been reading everything around him for years." "I know," Ellen said. "I've been living in his shadow too." A pause. "Take care of my sister." Carmen sent the photographs at 11:42 p.m. from a data plan she'd purchased at a gas station 2 months ago for reasons she couldn't have explained then. Now she understood she'd been preparing for something without knowing what it was. She sent them to Ellen. She sent them to herself. She sent them to a second address she created that same night. Then she set her alarm for 5:30 and tried to sleep. Thursday became Friday with that particular dragging quality that only the worst weights possess. Carmen worked her floors. She smiled at Dale in the lobby. She did not go to the 40th floor. She had told Diane, "Not Friday, the footage review. Stay still." At 2 p.m. she got a text from an unknown number. 3 words. "Lawyer has it." Carmen put her phone in her pocket and went back to changing sheets. Marcus Hale arrived at Hale Tower on Friday afternoon at 3:15. Carmen knew this not because she was watching, but because she'd learned the sound of his arrival over 2 years without meaning to. The particular way the lobby energy shifted. The way Dale straightened. The way the afternoon receptionist's voice changed register. She was on the 32nd floor when she heard it. she kept working. What she didn't know, what she would only learn later, was that Marcus had gone directly to the 40th floor, that he had let himself in with his key card and stood in the living room and looked at the shelf of paperback books and done a count he apparently did regularly. That when he finished the count, he'd gone still for a moment, in the way people go still when something doesn't add up. Then he'd walked to the window and looked out over the city for a long time. He went to see Dale at 4 p.m. Carmen was in the break room when she heard them in the hallway outside. Marcus's voice low and precise, asking about the Tuesday footage. Whether anyone had been in the 40th floor corridor. Whether any keys had been logged against that unit. Dale said he'd check. Carmen did not move. The break room door was open 2 inches. She could see Dale's shoulder and the edge of Marcus's jacket. Gray. Expensive. The jacket of a man who had never once in his life considered that someone in a housekeeping uniform might be listening. Marcus said, "And the new housekeeper, the one who does the upper floors. What do you know about her?" Dale said, "Reliable, no issues. Why?" A pause. "Just covering everything," Marcus said. She heard them move away down the hall. She picked up her phone, sent a single message to Ellen. Now. Ellen Rowan walked into the lobby of Hale Tower at 4:47 p.m. with an attorney named Sharon Greer and a detective named Rosa Villarreal from the Financial Crimes Unit who had been briefed by Sharon 2 hours earlier, who had made 2 phone calls of her own, and who had arrived with a colleague and a document that had been expedited through channels Carmen would never fully understand. Carmen learned all of this from the building's security monitor that Dale had abandoned when the lobby began to fill with people who were not supposed to be there. She watched from the service corridor. She watched Marcus Hale turn from the elevator bank and see his wife's sister walking toward him across the lobby he'd built and named after himself. She watched his face. It was the only time she ever saw Marcus Hale look like something other than a man in complete control. For exactly 3 seconds, he looked like what he was. A man whose carefully constructed distance between his public face and his private one had just collapsed. Then he recovered. He started speaking. He was very good. He spoke about grief and complexity and things that couldn't be understood without full context. And Detective Villarreal let him speak for approximately 45 seconds before she said the words that ended the performance. The words were, "We have evidence that Diane Hale is currently alive and on the premises, and we have a warrant." Dale, to his credit, looked genuinely shocked. Or not to his credit. It was hard to know from a service corridor monitor. What happened next moved quickly, the way things move when they've been held still too long. They found Diane on the 40th floor. She was sitting on the couch with a paperback in her hands, her spine straight, her face composed. She had been waiting. When the door opened and Ellen's voice came through first, something in Diane's face changed that wasn't crying and wasn't smiling. It was recognition. The deep, almost cellular kind. The body acknowledging that it is no longer alone. Marcus was taken from the lobby in handcuffs at 5:22 p.m. on a Friday evening in October. The chrome letters of his name were still bright on the floor. The evening light came through the glass doors and made them shine. There were people in the lobby who stood watching and didn't quite understand what they were seeing. An arrest. A wealthy man in a good suit being walked toward a car. The polished composure starting to crack, very slightly at the edges. Not enough for dignity, too much for innocence. The charges were extensive and would become more extensive as the documents were examined. Unlawful confinement, financial fraud, falsifying a death report. Additional charges related to the redirection of Diane's assets, the rewriting of her will, the life insurance policies that had quietly paid out after the declaration of death. A pattern of planning that stretched back further than 3 years to the systematic isolation of a woman who had been smarter than him and he had known it. In the weeks that followed, Carmen gave her account to the investigators twice. She did it in a room with her lawyer, a woman Ellen Rowan had arranged, and she answered every question with the same unhurried clarity she'd brought to her cart and her floors and her decision in a doorway on a Tuesday morning. When asked why she'd gotten involved when the personal risk was so significant, she paused for a moment. Not because she didn't have the answer, because she wanted to find the right words for it. "I cleaned that building for 2 years," she finally said. "I knew every room. I knew how things worked. And when I opened that door, the only question was whether I was going to use what I knew or pretend I didn't have it." She was not asked about the gas station data plan or the untraceable email address. She didn't offer the information. Some things belonged to her. Diane Hale spent 3 weeks in a hospital not because she was gravely ill, but because her body needed time to understand that the rules had changed. That food was not something to ration. That sleep did not have to be earned. That the door opened from the inside now. She requested Carmen visit her. Carmen came on a Thursday afternoon. They sat in a room with afternoon light coming through a window that faced west, and Diane had her 14 paperback books on the table beside her, reclaimed from the suite by investigators and returned to her as evidence and then, finally, as property. She said, "I thought about you every day after that first Tuesday. I thought, she probably went home and decided it was too much." "I thought about that too," Carmen said. Diane looked at her. "What made you decide differently?" Carmen thought about her daughter's school picture, about the side of a bus with a practiced smile on it, about doors and keys and the particular arithmetic of who gets protected and who gets disappeared. "You asked me if I worked for him," she said, "and the answer was no. And once I'd said it out loud, I had to act like it was true." The afternoon light moved across the floor between them. Diane nodded slowly. Like something had finally been confirmed, like she'd known the answer, had been holding it for months in the margins of a paperback book, and was glad to hear it spoken plainly at last. Some people will tell you the big moments are the ones that change things. The arrest, the verdict, the headlines, the charges read aloud in a courtroom while a man with a very good lawyer sat and stared at the middle distance. But the moment that changed things was smaller than that. It was a cart bumping a door, a latch giving way, a woman standing in a threshold and smelling something she recognized and deciding to walk toward it instead of away. It was the question Diane Hale had asked a stranger through 3 inches of open door. "Has he told anyone I'm dead yet?" And the stranger not answering, because some truths are too large for yes or no. And then choosing, quietly, methodically, without drama or announcement, to do the one thing that Marcus Hale had never accounted for in 3 years of careful planning. She chose to see. And in doing so, she proved what Carmen had always known from the floors and the hallways and the invisible spaces of buildings like that one. That the most dangerous person in any room is not the one with the most power.